Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's Dun& Bradstreet webinar. The topic of today's webinar is Restarting Business Activity, the Road Ahead. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce to you our esteemed speakers for the webinar, Mr. Sunil Mehta, Chief Executive, IBA, Shri Ashwini Bhatia, Managing Director, IT and SARG, SBI, Dr. Arun Singh, Global Chief Economist, Dun& Bradstreet. Before we begin the session, I would like to tell you all about certain things that we will follow during the webinar. Participants will not have access to talk during the entire length of the webinar to avoid any disruption during the webinar. At the end of the presentation, we will have a Q&A session. You can ask your questions using the Q&A tab on your screen. So I request you all to kindly note down any questions that you may have and ask the same during the Q&A session. Please note that you have to write your full name and organization name before asking the question. I will now hand it over to Dr. Arun Singh.
Thank you, Kaustav. Welcome to today's webinar. Today we have with us two eminent speakers, Shri Sunil Mehta, Ji, Chief Executive IBA, and Shri Ashwini Bhatia, Managing Director, IT and Stress Asset Resolution Group, State Bank of India. I'm looking forward to have a wonderful conversation on the subject, restarting business activity, the road ahead. This is very critical. This is apt in today's because we are in a part of Unlock 4 version. And going forward, we are basically looking forward to have a quick recovery and how that quick recovery is going to be sustained. That's all basically is everybody's mind. Today, we are going to discuss about the banking-led recovery initiatives, banking-led recovery planned by the government of India, and we have two eminent speakers to talk about that. Before we start the discussion, I want to talk about the state of the global and domestic economy and what is the next normal for India look like. In fact, next normal is a new normal for most of the global countries. But what is that for India? I'm going to talk about that. Beside that, in fact, I will also speak about what are some of the sectoral impact of COVID-19. Now, moving on, if you see in fact, the entire COVID-19 scenario can be categorized in four broad categories. It's a 2x2 matrix. One is early epidemics. The second is relapse. Third, high caseloads. And the fourth, effective containment. Most of the country fall into these four broad categories. The pandemic is ebbing in some of the countries that were hit hard early on, but the number of new cases is growing faster worldwide. With the easing of restriction and opening of the economies with differing intensities, the number of infections are also firming up, also going up. Several countries are experiencing a relapse in the infection with the opening of the economies. Most of the economy have effectively contained. That's basically the what you call the development on the COVID-19, and none of the economy you can see the follow what you can say the definite or concrete trend so as to decide what shape recovery will look like. Going by that, what's happening on that framework, if you see, there are many theories about the recovery shape, and the four theories basically coincide with what's happening with the pandemic today. That's the U-shaped recovery, V-shaped recovery, L-shaped recovery, and W-shaped recovery. Each and every economy will follow its own recovery plan, and India will have no exception. India have to go by that. Either it's a V-shaped recovery, either it's a W-shaped recovery, but that recovery will have a state variation, will have a regional variation, will have the sectoral variation, and in fact, it will also create most of the uncertainty for the next phase of recovery, in 2021, in 2022, basically. Moving on, having said that, the recovery will take a 4 to 5 broad structure. 100 up to 100 million people will be pushed into the extreme poverty in next 1 to 2 years. That's a serious concern when it comes to the basically the demand and demand revival and the resultant impact on in the economy. This is the worldwide data point. So 100 million is the people will be pushed into the world from the world framework perspective. Now, the risk front, if I have to see, Dun& Bradstreet Global Business Risk Report, basically we're doing since 2006. If you see this all-time high, which indicate that the risk perception in in the world and the most of the economy is all-time high. There are broadly 10 categories of inflation risk which we have shortlisted, which businesses have to worry about. But the reality is that business impact score today from the risk perspective is all-time high, which means that the risk perception is all-time high. But there's a silver lining. If you look at the stock market around the world are showing an upward trend. In some countries such as US and China, the broad market index has recovered from the fall witnessed in the few months back. In countries such as India and Japan, the broad market index is closely to the pre-pandemic levels. The rally is primarily driven by just few large companies and because of the stimulus package around the world. So there's a silver lining. There's a basically growth happening, and there's a the recovery happening at least some part of the economy worldwide. Looking at some of the real data point, when I say real data point, the IP manufacturing data, that's a real economy. That's going up. April was the worst hit market, but that's gone up in month of May. Now July, it's reasonable data. I mean to say we have gone back in the most of the countries. India is slightly lower, but for most of the economy, we have gone back what it used to be in the January and February. So that's a good sign from the recovery perspective. At least your financial market as well as the real market both are trending upward. The third data point, what we have done globally, we track 132 countries from a rating perspective, from a payment behavior perspective, that how the company in those economy are paying to their vendor and to the other supplier. From that perspective, we provide a rating to 132 countries. What we have done during the pandemic time, more than 100 countries we have downgraded. But it's the first time in the month of August, we have not downgraded any country. In fact, we have upgraded 10 countries, which is good sign. That's another sign that we are moving from a world perspective to the recovery framework. But the impact done, impact on the payment behavior. This is basically the share of prompt payment, what the most of economy are experiencing. That's going down. It used to be in the Germany more than 77%, it's now 75%. This very small moderation, but for India, it's from a 15%, it's gone to the 10%. What did it mean for us? The studies worldwide, if you see, have suggested that the reducing non-performing loans will have a positive medium-term impact on the economies. However, if the non-performing loan problems are left unresolved, then it will cost 2 percentage points of foregone growth annually to the economy. That's reality, which means the non-performing asset, the non-performing loans cannot let it go. Otherwise, it will cost economy quite dearly. Now, moving on to some of the sectoral impact and the next normal look like. If you see, in April 30, the definition of the containment zone and the restriction was imposed by the government of India. You can see the green left-hand side India map. The green is lowest restriction, amber is higher restrictions, and then red is the highest restrictions, if you can see. But look at the right side today, it's a global mobility index for the workplace mobility. If you see, mostly it's a green, which means more than 75% of the people are back to their workforce, which is good sign from a recovery perspective. But the damage done so far on the most of the sector which we have looked at is around 20 sectors which we have looked at. Some of the sectors will have a positive impact and some of the sectors will have a negative impact. In the negative impacted sectors, we have a moderate, high, and severe. These are the sectors will follow a different recovery path. For example, uh, you know, retail and wholesale, these are the basically the severely impacted today, but the once the unlock things resolve and once basically things are normalized, this will take not more than 6 months to recover. Whereas we have a gems and jewelry and then other aviation, hospitality and construction sector, that will take more than 12 months to recover, which means it could might take up to 2 years for the full recovery. Which means that's so critical for the lending community, for the government, for the company operating in these sectors to be very cautious about what behavioral trade they are displaying in the market from a recovery perspective. If you look at the next normal, these are the shift we have. The x-axis basically talks about the likelihood of the growth going in the future. Then and in fact the vertical axis talk about the growth during the COVID era. If you see the green part, there's an accelerated shift for example, do it yourself, digital payment, e-fitness, online shopping, self cooking, video streaming, social networking. These are the sectors, these are the sub-segment of the sector. So basically have witnessed accelerated growth during the COVID-19 and is likely to continue in the, which means these are the new normal. These are the basically the area where the company will try to invest time and energy to stay on. And there are sectors, there are basically stuff which was not there in the past, did not grow during the COVID-19, but the likelihood of growing very fast is the basically the sector in the blue box, the grocery delivery, e-commerce, e-hobby, e-books, e-coupons, all that segment and sector is basically going to play a significant role. Now, in the start, I spoke about the banking-led growth or the credit-led growth, but unfortunately, what's happening today, out of that top 100 bank in the world, in the India, basically, we have just one bank which feature in the top largest bank in the world. That's SBI, and that's as against what you call look at the China, USA, Japan. They have a many. Unfortunately, we are missing that gap. So the idea is that how we have to basically leverage this scenario to create that platform that the recovery are prompt and the recovery are sustainable. That's in that context we will have some of conversation today. Unfortunately, there are many discussion happening. We had stimulus measure, but that stimulus measure, whether it's too little or maybe too much, that basically will decide the recovery growth path, the sustainable growth path, and what else required from that perspective. Because we had 21 trillion stimulus package, but when it comes to the sustainable, how impactful of that, that's a very critical question everyone is asking, and we might look forward for the answer towards that. Now, to closing with that, uh, uh, some of the economy, when the world framework, when we look at, we project 132 countries, and most of the economy for 2021 perspective, looking at V-shaped recovery. The V-shaped recovery doesn't mean that it's a sustainable. It's basically the pent-up demand, which they got damaged in 2020, is going to be there in 2021. But might be 2022 could be different picture. Maybe the quarterly data may be different picture. If you look at the India, is likely to grow something around 5%, or likely to decline by 5% in 2020, is likely to have a very significant upside in 2021 by 6.7%. So most of the economy, while showing a V-shaped recovery, the quarterly data, monthly data, and the sustainability is going to have a critical role to play. With that, I will close my opening comment, and I will move to today's discussion point. And I'm looking forward for today's discussion with, and there are many models of the economic recovery I talked about, and one is the bank-led recovery. The Atmanirbhar Bharat stimulus package of the government against the pandemic lays down the credit-led economic recovery for India. Banks will have to play an important role in jump-starting the economy. Uh, in fact, RBI early on offered the loan moratorium to the businesses and individual, which has provided the economy a big support, a much needed support. However, the concerns are different. Concerns are the what will happen, in fact, the post-moratorium, what will happen, the cases of non-performing loans might go up, might stay same, or, vice versa. In the financial stability report of the RBI, they have forecasted that gross non-performing and ratio may jump from 8.5% to the 14.7% by March 2021 in the severe case scenario. Banks will have to play a big role in extending the credit to the businesses to continue their operation, therefore reviving the economy. It becomes, in that context, it's very important and very critical for the bank and the government to ensure that increase in the non-performing loans do not deter the growth of the economy, slowing it further down. So that's a critical. Bank's role is to provide credit, but the government and the regulator role to ensure that the credit is healthy and that's not turning into the NPA, because then it's not going to be sustainable. With that context, we have today we have two eminent speakers, Mr. Sunil Mehta, Chief Executive, Indian Banks Association. Mr. Sunil Mehta is a Chief Executive of Indian Bank Association, which acts as a representative of over 253 member banks, an associate member operating in India, and plays a collaborative role between banks, regulators, and government in improving customer services with a focus on digital banking. Prior to this, Mr. Sunil Mehta served as a MD and CEO of Punjab National Bank. He is a seasoned banker with over 37 years of rich experience. He holds master degree in agronomy, MBA in finance, and the certified associate of Indian Institute of Bankers. He started his banking career as an agriculture field officer at Allahabad Bank in 1982. Prior to assuming the position of MD and CEO in Punjab National Bank, he was Executive Director of Corporation Bank. Welcome, Mr. Sunil Mehta, for today's conversation. I'm looking forward to have a discussion with you. Our next speaker is Mr. Sri Ashwini Bhatia ji, Managing Director, IT and Stress Asset Resolution Group verticals of the State Bank of India. He's a graduate in physics and mathematics from Dayal Bagh, Agra, and is an MBA from Poddar Institute of Management, Jaipur. Prior to his appointment as a MD, Mr. Bhatia was Managing Director and CEO of SBI Funds Management Private Limited. Mr. Bhatia has also had a stint with State Bank of Capital Market as a President and Chief Operating Officer. Mr. Bhatia comes with a rich experience of over 3.5 decades in the State Bank Group. Before joining State Bank of India Funds Management Private Limited, he was working as a Chief General Manager, Corporate Center in SBI, where he was responsible for revamping of credit structure and processes of the banks. Welcome, Sri Bhatia ji, for the today's panel discussion. Now, I will begin with Mr. Mehta ji with the first question. We are talking about reviving the credit growth. In that context, what steps do banks need to take to strengthen their capital position, at the same time support the economy through a revival of credit growth?
Thank you for an elaborate introduction, and I would like to share my perspective about enablers for capitalization of the banking system in India. You are pretty well aware that the Indian banking system was acquiring capital, and during 2019 March and 2020, the capital adequacy ratios of the banking sector has gone up from 14.3 to 14.8%, and definitely the capital position was strengthening because of the three basic factors. One thing was basically fresh acquisition of the capital. The government of India has planned the merger of 10 banks into the 4 banks in September 2019, and they have provided a substantial capital to all of them. So making their capital adequacy levels at least 2% above the minimum required levels prescribed by a regulator. You are also aware that the private sector banks have also taken a lot of initiative, and they have executed it also, the Axis Bank, the ICICI Bank, and the HDFC banks. So they have already gone for raising capital in a good time, because this is a time where the investors are looking for a good avenues to invest, and the valuations are good to invest, and that's why they were able to raise the substantial capital. So I do not find capital to be any constraint in credit growth going forward, at least for the coming year, because during last year, as you rightly stated, that the economy did not grow. GDP has fallen down, and the first quarter it was reduced by 28%, and the overall credit growth even last year was lower, but the NPL levels were also lower. So both of the things, reduction in the NPL levels of the bank as well as reduction in the credit growth, has given them the greater cushions in the terms of capital and given a greater base level for going forward. Now, how to enable the credit growth? So I think there are two things. One thing is the efforts which has been made by the government. Few of the things on the consumption side, I think the government during this pandemic has pumped in 1,70,000 crore of the money to the rural and the masses, who to facilitate like 500 rupees each to each women PMJDY beneficiary, and maybe 6,000 per family to the farmer's family, so that they can face the struggle and keep consuming and keep the absorbing the shock during this pandemic. Secondly, the greater rollout was there in the MNREGA. MNREGA is basically an employment generation program in rural areas, which provides a regular source of employment to the people who don't have any employment. So that also facilitates the consumption as well as demand side of it. The third major factor, which the supply side of it is, government has realized the problem of the banking system in funding in this pandemic period. So they have come out with the Atmanirbhar Bharat, which entails a 3 lakhs crore of the guarantee scheme to the scheduled commercial banks as well as the NBFCs for lending to the MSME sector. So this guaranteed scheme gives a 100% guarantee for fresh lending in the form of working capital term loan, which is repayable in 4 years. So first 12 months is a moratorium, and the remaining 3 years they have to repay. And that amount is 20% of the outstanding fund-based limits of these entities. So this particular scheme has got a lot of good traction in the economy. So if you see, as of now, 1,70,000 crore Indian rupees has already been sanctioned by the banks, and roughly 60 to 70% of it has already been disbursed. And I'm sure that remaining part of the scheme will also be consumed by the financial sector. So all these things are given enablers in the form of growth to the credit. On the side of RBI, I think our regulator has acted very proactively. During this period itself, they have reduced the base repo rates and all this reference rate substantially. So that reduces the cost of credit for the ultimate consumer, and that facilitates the investment into the various options. Besides this, the regulator has also pumped in enough liquidity by reducing the capital, there's a cash reserve ratio requirement has been reduced by 1% time. Then the capital conservation buffer, the last tranche of it, 0.625, which was to be built up during this year, has also been postponed for some time. So all these things are giving a cushion to the Indian banking system to take the growth with the available capital. Another enabler which the government is providing is in the form of reviving of the stressed MSME. So there is a subordinate debt scheme which provides a capital support also to the MSME so that they can restructure their loan, take the capital in the form of a subordinate debt, which will be guaranteed by the guarantee corporations, and it can be help in the revival of the already closed MSME. So a lot of efforts has been done on the part of the regulator in providing liquidity, and the government has also done a good step by providing the support to the banking system on supply side of it. Now what is need to be done is yes, on the demand side of it, and a lot of other enablers are needed in that direction.
Thank you, Mr. Mehta. I know that was really insightful, and I do agree that there are a lot more government and RBI have done, and in fact, a lot more are expected to ensure that things are moving in the direction. Now, moving to you, Mr. Bhatia ji, that if you, in fact, I just presented one facts that if you go back to the financial stability report, what RBI have just published. Uh, and in fact, just talking about the NPA ratio is going to be something around 14.7%, something around less than 15% by end of March 2021. And that's a severe case scenario. Do you see that's happening in reality? Because when we talk about the credit, then the bankers have to be really cautious about if that is the scenario, then which sectors, what premium rate, what interest rate, that all will reply, and that all will basically the part of that game. If that is happening, then what steps are the banking sector and your bank basically taking to avoid that scenario?
So, thank you, Dr. Singh, for the introduction. The RBI Financial Stability Report talked about the NPAs rising to 14.7%. So actually, they had also taken a few parameters that would actually lead to this number of 14.7. One of them was the GDP growth. So that we think is in the severe category. So as per the SBI research, our GDP will be contracting about 10% or so. But the other parameters that the Financial Stability Report talked about, the CPI and inflation, weighted average cost of lending, combined fiscal deficit, and current account balances, and so on. We think that the country should be doing much better. So, weighted average cost of lending has come down sharply. Mr. Mehta just said that RBI has been proactively reducing rates, providing liquidity, taken away 1% from CRR, and reverse repo, which is the effective rate currently, is at 3.35. In fact, corporates today are raising money at 3.35%, 3.4%. And individual can get a housing loan at below 7%. So 14.7%, the number that you have been talking about, we don't think that will happen. I can only speak for State Bank of India, and I can tell you that our gross NPA was a little less than 6. Our net NPA is less than 1.85, and the current indicators that we have seen so far would suggest that this kind of number is not there at all. It is far too pessimistic. Now, very clearly, look at our foreign currency reserve. So we are touching $540 billion. RBI today has a problem in managing the foreign currency in the sense that rupee is getting stronger, with the kind of inflows that are coming in. So I don't think that we will be touching 14.7%. I do concede that this is going to be a moving number, but 14.7 looks very, very unlikely at this stage. You touched upon the stock market, and you also talked about V curve, U curve, L curve, and all that. So this crisis is obviously different. All the crises in the past had their genesis in the financial markets. This one is totally different. This is pandemic, so it impacts livelihoods, it impacts society. So far more serious as compared to the other crises we've had in the past. And I do agree with Mr. Mehta when he also said that Reserve Bank of India has done a lot of the heavy lifting. It has brought in a lot of confidence into the financial markets. So whether they have done it through LTROs or TLTROs or giving guarantees, that has helped to a very, very large extent. Deposits, of course, have moved to safety, they've moved to quality, and I think 14.7 is a very, very pessimistic view of the overall economic scenario.
Yeah, certainly, Mr. Bari, I do agree, because then in fact RBI also have taken various scenario, and they have taken very severe scenario in case the pandemic is basically creating painful activities in the India economy in terms of declining. Yeah.
If I may interrupt, so the index hit its bottom around March. And at that time, you had only 300 COVID cases in the country, and the Nifty came down to 7,500. From 7,500, it went to 11,800, which is a 50% recovery. So stock markets are generally forward-looking, and they discount the future far better than ordinary souls like us. So I would, be with the markets when they actually project the future.
True. Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, in fact, that's that's what I was trying to say, that the financial market, along with the real market, there's IP data, is also going in the direction. And you're right, and the RBI have taken a very severe call of saying the 15% by end of March 2021 is too harsh, because economy might take a different role and different route to reach at to the pre-pandemic level. And coming back to you, Mr. Mehta, you talked about what are the initiatives taken by the government and the regulator. How effective have been, could be the government's and regulator intervention in terms of the stimulus package we basically just talked about, and in fact, realigning the loan default framework and other liquidity measures from the broad-based economy perspective, because you just talked about the number of measures, and absolutely no doubt about that, they have taken many, but how effective that from this framework perspective?
So it's a very right question, and I think India is now blessed with one very great achievement, that is a JAM Trinity, where the entire say population, especially those who are at the bottom of the pyramid, are connecting to the banking network, because the Jan Dhan accounts which are opened, so all those got serviced by the banking system, and the entire amount that I stated earlier that the government has earned, it was transferred to roughly 30 crores people in just 2 days. So that was a very fast movement of the money, and very effective, because that has provided a lot of relief. And the banking system, the banking system in India was declared as an essential service, and the Indian banking system has worked even during the lockdown. So people were there, the transactions were not even a single day, the internet banking was stopped, the ATMs were stopped. 98% was the availability of the banking system during the lockdown period itself. That has really provided a continuity to the entire ecosystem. As regards efficacy of the government measures, so as I told you in the beginning, that out of 3 lakh crore, 1,70,000 crore has already been sanctioned by the banks, even during this unlock period. Complete unlock has not happened even today. And as you have already displayed, that the entire zones were divided into orange, red, and green. And the green, I think, has started coming back to the normalcy. So agriculture and even the infrastructure operations into the green belt, they have started. Government has already permitted that in the unlock, and that has started giving some boost to the economic activity on the side of wage earnings, also on the side of demand side also. Then the other steps which the government has taken for create the demand is basically giving the psychological support in the form of giving guarantees to the different loans being made by the NBFC sector, because people were thought that NBFC should also be given support to provide the liquidity to the for economic activity. So there was a separate LTRO window which was brought forward for especially these NBFCs, and they were also graded into three: small size, mid size, and large size, and they were given support accordingly so that they have adequate liquidities to fund the operations even during the pandemic, and people should not feel panic about it. As regards the efficacy of the other schemes, I think it will mainly depend upon how the pandemic pans out in future, because right now the numbers are going up, and it all depends. The full stability may come back after the vaccine is there in the market. But as already shared with you by Bhatia ji, that the markets are the best judgment and they are very optimistic about it. So the markets really feel that the 60 to 70% of the real economy has already come back, especially in the green zone and the orange zone. The red zone, which are the containment zone, which is basically confined to the metropolitan areas and the urban areas, there some issues are there, the challenges are there. So it may take some more time to demand to come back into those areas. And that will mainly depend upon how the pandemic pans out and how it is controlled in these areas. But going forward, the demand side will require a greater thrust, and the government is seriously working on it. I think the demand can be pulled by giving greater weightage to the infrastructure development, because infrastructure sector as well as the affordable housing are the two key priorities of the government, and these two are the drivers of the demand. They are drivers of the demand in this sense, because when the government make investment into these areas, there is a demand for steel, there is a demand for cement, there is a demand for a lot of manpower, and there is a lot of demand for ancillary items, especially for affordable housing. There is a demand of fans, there is electrical equipment. So a lot of things go simultaneously when you push these two sectors. Government is already started looking at it. Road sector is really doing very good, and I think the transport minister and the road minister, Mr. Nitin Gadkari, he very clearly stated that yes, they have not even achieved the target. They have surpassed their targets of road building even during this lockdown period and the pandemic period. That shows that yes, government stimulus are creating effectiveness. But one thing is very sure: we cannot depend for everything on everything for the government. It is the entire ecosystem that has shown that the private player will also have to come forward. They have to come forward to rebuild the confidence into the consumer, to rebuild the confidence into the employees. And the rebuilding will be like properly prescribing and observing the standing operating procedures, so that people can safely work even during this pandemic time, keeping the infection rate to the one of the lowest level, and still continue to do the economic activity and building the confidence for coming back of this. So the entire ecosystem, including the private sector, the media, the system, they have to play a role. I think the enough education has already been given, awareness has already been created about the safeguards to be taken during the pandemic. Only if proper implementation and rebuilding of the confidence, I think the entire measure can come back, bring back the entire economy back to normalcy, maybe in next few months. So that is, let's hope for the best.
Yeah, certainly, Mr. Mehta. And in fact, I'm hoping, in fact, it should come back as soon as possible, maybe the next month. That's that's expectation. And you know, on you touched based on the JAM Trinity. So I'll tell you, in fact, so you are aware of the fact that with Digital India initiative, and in fact, before that also, the government was running a 44 mission mode project, and banking industry, digitizing banking industry was one of mission mode project. And to be very honest, this is the one mission mode project who's basically grown in many shape, and that there is no number attached to that, because the growth is completely different, and that's a completely transformed. And today, I don't think so last 7-8 years I have gone to any of the bank physically, and that's basically, I can say that that was a savior in this time of COVID, because the government have taken initiative to reach out to consumer directly without using any of the without using any of the physical method. That was basically good development, I can see, and that was one of the savior during the COVID-19. So in that context, coming back to you, Mr. Bhatia, because we are talking about the digital transformation, we are talking about how future look like when we talk about the digital transformation. What major digital transformation changes have you witnessed in the pandemic duration, and expect to see in the near future, from a banking perspective and from your own experience perspective?
So very clearly, what I have seen is what everyone has seen. So the move to digital payments, because e-commerce has taken flight, is so evident actually. So during the last 4 to 5 months, we know that payments digitally, either through the UPI or the use of internet banking and so on, they have really taken off. In State Bank of India, I can also tell you that today 91% of our work is done digitally. So that is either through the YONO platform, through ATMs, through internet banking, through UPI, through mobile banking. And this trend will only accelerate, and we think that in the next 5 to 6 years, this will become close to 100%, and branches will maybe become service points for non-financial transactions, and maybe points where customers can do do insurance, mutual fund, credit cards, and so on and so forth. So it's very clear that the digital footprint will go up. So today, a soldier who is in Leh, Ladakh can, on his mobile, take a personal loan, and his family can withdraw it in Tamil Nadu. It is as simple as that. Gold loans have moved to the internet platform. So give all your static data, and then go to the branch, and with that code, just give your gold and come out with the cash. Same is the case with pension loans, and anything that is repetitive in nature, I think, will move to the digital platform. This will also happen for MSME when we start getting data from GST, Aadhaar, and other platforms. And this also merges or marries, with what the Ministry of Finance is saying in their guidelines. So the roadmap for banks out there is also very clear. So they want easy access to all customers as far as banking services are concerned. I have no doubt in my mind that as the usage of smartphone goes up, you'll be able to do KYCs online, through OTPs, and onboarding is going to become far more easier.
Right. So moving back to you, Mr. Mehta, now, we're talking about the banking-led recovery, and because that's going to be a very critical, and that's going to be very important in today's perspective. So do you see the banking fraternity working on the 3 R's, which is basically reset business operations, reprioritize business goals, and reconfigure strategies?
Yes, I think it's a very pertinent question, and I'll just give you a brief about it. Like India is blessed with a very smart banking regulator. I think RBI is on one side of the stability report, they have raised a strong alarm that yes, NPL levels can double within a year because of this pandemic. And on the another side of it, they have provided a lot of enablers to prevent it. The enablers in the form of giving the moratorium for first 6 months during the period of this pandemic. And now you're pretty well aware that in the month of August, they have come out with a scheme where the banking system is now allowed to go for a restructuring of their existing loan based so that the downgrade of these NPLs can be prevented. Because if the downgrade happens, then it becomes very difficult for a banking system to support those entities and the enterprises, and it becomes very difficult for them to bounce back in the economy. So on one side, raising an alarm, on the other side, providing enablers so that the banks can cope up with those challenges. So these things has given a lot of new thoughts to the banking system. And at an IBA level, we had a management committee meeting in which all the MDs of the banks were involved, and we have worked out on these strategies that how to fast track the resolution process during this challenging time, and so that quickly the resolutions can happen for the stress, and the lot of enablers are already there. So as you already said, there are 3 R's. So the first thing is how do they reset their business strategies. So one thing to reset is they say that, okay, if we have to go and we have to provide easy access to our customers. So every bank has decided that, okay, we will host the various relief measures which the banking system is going to provide to the various corporates, MSMEs, and the individual borrowers will be hosted on the website of each and every bank. The another thing is that there will be a mechanism in which that the tracking of the request of the people for availing these dispensations, availing this restructuring, so that they are able to maintain their activity and even able to get additional funding wherever they need be, so that the system can be maintained. And how to reprioritize it? To reprioritize it, I think the first priority has been given to give a strength to the existing borrower who were not defaulted by nature, who are basically standard accounts as on 1st March with less than 30 days of the overdue. All of them will be covered under this dispensation. So they will be able to get this restructuring. Restructuring is not only in the form of postponement, it is in the form of working capital reassessment also. I think first time the RBI has liberalized the working capital reassessment process also. They have allowed the banks to go for say restructuring of the loans by restructuring of the working capital also, and that restructuring will not tantamount to downgrade of those assets. For example, the debtors realization period has gone up, or maybe the inventory holding period has gone up because of this lockdown and the pandemic, or maybe the sales have come down. But if we reassess the working capital based on this increased working capital cycle, maybe they are able to retain the same working capital limits even with the reduction of the sales. That will support the enterprise to maintain the quality of their assets during this difficult time. Another thing is the RBI has also permitted the reduction of margins also, so that they can build it up again, and even creation of a FITL that will support for sustaining them the interest payment during the remaining 6 months after lockdown. So maybe FITL can be debited to recover, and then it can be paid back in the next 6 months. So there are a lot of enablers which the regulator has provided, and the banking system has now geared up. The 3 R's they are using in reprioritizing their activities, like how to support the healthy entities which were healthy in the pre-COVID stage, how they should maintain their health and should not downgrade, and how to provide them support for taking this. So one thing what the bank themselves has done is providing 10% emergency line of credit immediately on the onset of COVID. So this happened as early in say February and March when the pandemic was the impact was known. I think by the end of April, most of the banks have already made available 10% of the working capital limit as a COVID emergency line of credit for most of the borrowers, especially into the corporate and the commercial sector. Then the second thing is that emergency line of credit for MSME, that is also that 20% of the limits are now made available to the corporates to sustain their operations, because I know these particular operations they are sustaining during pandemic time. It is not the additional limit is not backed by increase in sales. It is not backed by increase in production capacities, but it is basically absorption of the overhead costs which the enterprises have incurred during this time. So even this type of facility is guaranteed by the even government also. So government has come out with a scheme that's emergency line of credit scheme where the 20% of the incremental lending this sector is 100% guaranteed by the government, and which has a second charge. It means the first priority will remain with the lender, and in case they are still not able to pay, then the fallback will be on the guarantee scheme. So all these enablers have really helped the banks in reprioritize their activities. Now with the digital, as Mr. Bhatia rightly said, the digitalization of the lending processes is already in the process. I think our NESCL, which is a information utility, now we have given them this mandate to go for digitalization of the loan documentation also, so that most of the loan documentation which earlier was doing manually can be done digitally. And especially the loan products, as Mr. Bhatia told, that gold loan has already been brought on online. So most of the banks are coming out with the digital product. Already earlier there like 59minutes.com was available for in principle approval of the MSME loans, and now the digitalization is happening for the entire loan life cycle. So I think the banking system in India is now repositioning itself. They are taking the shifting from their brick and mortar and traditional system of operating to the more digital system, and there is a lot of transformation happening into the banking space. And I'm happy to share with you that recently on 18th of the last this month only, our MC committee, we have taken a decision how to fast track the entire decision making process during this pandemic time by putting all these enablers into the public domain so that a faster resolution of the stress which the enterprises are facing on account of the COVID can be met out with the faster integrator agreements, by simplified restructuring processes, as well as by providing other enablers for a quick decision making. So I hope the system is geared up to adopt the 3 years during this time.
No, thank you, but thank you, Mr. Mehta, for your insight, and that was really covering all the point, and that was really good coverage you had and provided in that, and good insightful information on that. Now, coming to you, Mr. Bhatia, you, in fact, you are the only bank in top 100 in the world, and given that, which means the MSME dependency is very high on the state bank, and that's what is covering most of the part in India. In fact, I have to say that all. From that perspective, if you're looking at MSME borrower perspective, what is your, in fact, what is your opinion on the restructuring of debt of MSME borrower? Do you think this is a viable solution for MSMEs to overcome their liquidity position? And the third part, what steps can you suggest for India, for the companies in India, to avoid default in the coming days? Mr. Bhatia?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So let me take the second question first. So, when a company is in distress, the first thing, of course, is to recognize that there is a problem and not be in denial for too long. So during the last couple of months, we've had one large airport asset being taken over by somebody and one retail chain being taken over by somebody. So, what I'm trying to say is that if there is a problem, there is always a solution also. And specifically in the case of a large conglomerate, the way it has been able to raise capital during the last 4 or 5 months, it's amazing. It talks about the confidence of the model. It talks about the confidence of Indian demographics. It talks about confidence about the India growth story. So there are many ways in which you can avoid restructuring. You can sell stakes. You can, reduce debt in so many ways. Acts like the IBC and others are only enablers for resolution. To your first question on MSMEs, our experience is that most of them are preserving cash. Many have not come to take the extra borrowing, although the dispensation was available to them. And I agree with Mr. Mehta when he says that this time, the enhancement or the increase in limit was mainly to ensure that the firm was a going concern. So the MSMEs have been very, very practical, I would say, and they've taken a very realistic view of the challenges. I only wish that, many of the MSMEs, to my mind, face working capital issues. And if their dues are paid, if their bank guarantees are released by large corporations, that would perhaps solve their immediate requirements, and they'll get going once again. But the provision of restructuring of MSMEs is very much there. KV Kamath committee has laid down the boundaries. Again, very practical. The 5 ratios that they have to meet on TOL, adjusted TNW, TOL, TNW, the interest coverage ratios, the current ratios, and so on and so forth for the 26 industries. I think they've taken a very practical view of the problem on hand. It's not one formula for everybody. So real estate and hospitality get far more leeway than others. So, but of course, it's based on cash flows, and cash flows are not too easy to project, in these difficult times. But I would say that this time MSMEs have been very, very practical. It's not as if they've rushed to the banks for restructuring and so on and so forth.
No, but thank you, Mr. Bhatia. And you touch base two aspects on one is IBC and one is basically Kamath Committee report. And of course, I mean, I echo the voice, what today we are discussing. This government have taken proactive steps in order to help economy, in order to support banking industry to lend to the companies, and the same time, in order to basically the protect banking, they basically also have the Kamath Committee report. And in that context, coming back to you, Mr. Mehta, that how can we strengthen the due diligence processes so as to minimize instances where companies indulge in terms of the a different reporting system or something, what you call the financial ratios, financial reporting. In fact, as against threshold set by the Kamath Committee to become eligible for restructuring of their debt. So is there any the processes and the due diligence process they can follow, and how we can strengthen that?
So it's a very pertinent question, and incidentally, I had the opportunity to working as a member secretary of the Kamath Committee, and I'm also signatory to that report. So I'll share you my perspective. These ratios are not basically ratios which are benchmark for becoming eligible for restructuring. These ratios are the benchmark for eligibility of a restructuring to pass through. So there's a difference between the two. Like a person while coming for restructuring might have ratios below this. They might have eaten away their cash during this pandemic period and may not be having a current ratio of 1. But post restructuring, in the first year of their operation, if we restructure, then part of it is carved out as a working capital term loan or part of it is cut out, it should be able to reach the minimum 1. So that is a spirit of these ratios. So I think there is no question of manipulation because they won't be able to manipulate. It is basically in most of the corporates, they are into the public domain, and in India now there are multiple checks. Multiple checks in the sense is not only that they have to file their final accounts with the registrar of companies, or they have to put their final accounts in the public domain. There is a system of GST, and GST systems can be assessed by the banking system, and the GST reports are available. You can very well verify that the sales, because nobody will pay taxes unnecessarily without booking the sales. So if there are sales, then only they will pay the taxes. So there is a very good correlation now available within the GST information available in the public domain and the final accounts which are prepared by the person. And especially these benchmarks, as I told you in the beginning, they are the benchmark for restructuring. So suppose the current ratios are below 1 at particular time, the borrower is approaching the banking system. They can come out with a plan that this is the ratios have come down. So we may come out with the injection of this much of the fresh capital, which can become as a working capital margin, and the current ratios can be jacked up to above 1 by restructuring. Or if they are not in a position to contribute any margin, then bankers can carve out a non-covered portion of their working capital as a working capital term loan, which can be recovered in the next 2 years, and the current ratios can be brought to the level of 1. So that clarity I wanted to bring to it, that these ratios are the minimum benchmark for qualification of a restructuring package, and it won't require any manipulation on the part of any of the borrower.
No, thanks for the information. Thanks for the insight, Mr. Mehta, because that's quite, in fact, information for everyone, because it could not be taken in the different context, could not be basically, change the due diligence process. So coming back to you, Mr. Bhatia, I know we are running short of time and we in fact exceeded much allotted. The last question I have, since you raised subject about the IBCs, basically, What further frameworks are required to effectively manage bad loans? Do we need to further strengthen the IBC? Do we need to design an out-of-court restructuring framework?
To my mind, IBC was a wonderful piece of legislation that led to India's rankings in ease of doing business going up, no questions about that. And if you compare it with Lok Adalat, or if you compare it with DRT or SARFAESI, the recovery percentages are far better in the case of IBC. In some cases, bankers have also got 100% recovery, Binani Cement being a case in point. And in many large where there were good assets, we got very decent recoveries of 60 to 70%. Imagine getting a recovery of $6 or $7 billion and all coming in one go. So obviously there are good quality of assets. The problem is not that there are no good assets, but the problem is that the balance sheets are weak. So it's always right for the promoter to move out and not fall in love with the asset. And it pains us no end, when, people try to game the system, or, those kind of things also happen. But IBC is evolving legislation. The government has also been proactive in bringing about changes in legislation as the requirements were there from different stakeholders. Besides IBC, I don't think much needs to be done. Of course, currently it is in abeyance for a while because of COVID. But if the timelines are met, 180 days, 270 days, and so on and so forth, and we adhere to the June 2019 circular of RBI, I think we are in good shape.
Okay. So that was good, Mr. Patil. Now, and last question to you, Mr. Mehta. That's basically, I know we have crossed time, but I thought this is important for our audience to understand that how do we further strengthen the framework for dealing with loan frauds? Is the system of early warning signals rigorous across all banks, especially the public sector banks?
Well, so first I would like to supplement what Mr. Bhatia said. Like IBC is the one legislation which is basically the most effective legislation and has been improved very considerably, very fast. This is one legislation where the amendments have happened so fast to meet the requirements of the banking sector, to meet the requirement of the financial sector, to make it effective. Instead of Section 29A, deciding about the fallback mechanism. So all these things have really helped. And now a pre-pack is also in the process of legislation, because incidentally I was a member of that Insolvency Law Committee. So I can share with you that they are already going to the framework which is available in the rest of the world, like many of the countries in Europe and America. It's a pre-pack arrangement that is also now is being looked into by the IBC framework to facilitate the resolution process. As regards proactive measures for fraud detection, I think the regulator has already prescribed that there should be minimum 13 early warning signals based upon their intensity and the priority in with each segment, which should be embedded into the every bank's risk management system. Those early warning signals should definitely throw signals about any incidents of the fraud, and when any account these signals are thrown, the user bank can definitely red flag that account, and that red flag account need to be examined from the fraud angle. And after the account is red flagged, within 6 months the bankers have to decide whether there is an element of fraud in that red flag or not. If there is an element of fraud, then they have to proceed accordingly and take appropriate actions against the entity or the perpetrators of the fraud. And if there is no fraud there, then they can remove the red flag and the organization can continue to operate. So this really requires a further strengthening, because these early warning signals are based on the empirical data available in the form of time series and the historical data available to the banks. but now there is a greater need for use of the artificial intelligence and the data analytical tools to find out the transaction analysis. When the bankers simultaneously do transaction analysis on a real-time basis, I think that will generate the best early warning signals, and the banker system will be able to prevent the fraud. The entire ecosystem is working for it. The early warning signals have mandatorily been adopted by all the public sector bank as well as the private sector bank. Many of the advanced banks have already started using artificial intelligence and the data analytics for generating new early warning signals and finding the thresholds for them. And maybe going forward, there's a lot of scope for improvement in this area by using these digital analytical techniques right now available in the market. So I hope the banking system in India is geared up and has understood these challenges and is geared up to face these challenges on a proactive basis.
Thank you, Mr. Mehta, for your insightful. And I do agree with you that AI, the fourth industrial revolution technology, is the only way out to deal with all the issue related to the fraud and other related items. So thank you for bringing that out, and thank you, Mr. Bhatia, for all your perspective. Now I have a many audience question, but it seems that time will not permit. I will allow just two questions, one for Mr. Mehta and one for Mr. Bhatia. So the first question is to you, Mr. Mehta, that a request for perspective, and in fact, Mr. R.K. Anand is asking that, what is your perspective on the ease of execution of ICAs?
Okay. Oh, yes. So it's a very pertinent question. And I think the way I told that the bankers are working together to speed up the process of ICA so that resolutions can happen faster, especially during this pandemic time. So 18th of this month itself, the IBA has prepared a draft of ICA, which the member banks can accept. And that draft has already been circulated to the member banks for their suggestions. The point is, we want to go for a system where the bottlenecks in execution of the ICA are removed, and the moment the threshold levels are reached, maybe 60% by number and 75% by value, as per the RBI regulatory guidelines, the ICA can be executed immediately, maybe within a few weeks. And the outer limit is 1 month, and that ICA should make it a binding force for the remaining lenders who may not have opted for that resolution, but since they are part of that consortium, they are part of that multiple lending framework, they have to abide by that resolution framework. So I think that ICA is already work in progress. A larger consensus has already been achieved, and I hope we will be able to pave way for quicker resolution of that.
Thank you, Mr. Mehta. So there's one more question for you. In fact, there's many, but I think I'll choose pick just one for you, Mr. Bhatia. That how many corporates with overall exposure of more than 1,500 crore have come forward to seek restructuring under the August 6th scheme? Do you have any perspective on that, Mr. Bhatia?
So this can be the headline tomorrow. I can say it's nil.
Oh, that's surprising. Yeah.
So I mean, the reason for that is very clear. That the RBI instituted the AQR, and all the problem loans, all the infrastructure loans, power sector, and those large assets have already been declared NPAs or are in the stressed category. The books of most of the banks are currently quite clean. So there will not be many large accounts that will actually come for this kind of restructuring, to my mind.
Okay. So I know I promised that I will ask just one question, but there's one question actually asked by many, and this question is to Mr. Mr. Mehta, that In case of company already has the stipulated ratio, let's say CR of 1, will they be eligible if they want to basically go for restructuring in spite of the fact that they maintain current ratio at 1, or what? Basically, that's basically I think this ask.
I think yes, it's good that this question has been asked. The Kamath committee report and the RBI prescription into it is very liberal. These are the minimum benchmarks, and there is no way any restriction in achieving better than the benchmark. In fact, what we have said in our report is, and it's very clear, that every company will be at a different level of their ratios on a pre-COVID stage. So long as they were maintaining all their repayment track record in time, they were not more than 30 days overdue, they are eligible for avail any type of restructuring, even if their ratios were more or less. So that is not a benchmark for them. Only point is, if they go for restructuring, maybe if they were below the minimum benchmark level during the COVID time, on restructuring, they should achieve the minimum benchmark line. But anybody who was already above the benchmark stage before the 1st of the March, and if they maintain the same thing even in the post restructuring, that is a welcome thing. No banker, no lender will have any objection for it. They will rather welcome it, and because ratios are something different and the requirement of restructuring can be different. A company with a higher ratio may also require a restructuring to keep their liquidity moving and maintaining the proper strength of the balance sheet. So these ratios are basically the minimum benchmarks or maybe maximum benchmark for certain criteria. Like DSCR 1 is the minimum benchmark. It doesn't mean anybody who has got DSCR of more than 1.2 or 1.3 is not welcome. They are always welcome. That is a minimum benchmark. So it has provided very much a broad field for all the lenders as well as the corporate to find out suitability of their resolution plan within this framework. And I think that will cover the address of the issues of the 90% of the borrower who may feel any stress during this pandemic. And these are the professionally proven minimum benchmarks which the committee has prescribed.
No, thank you, Mr. Mehta, for that guidance and for that clarity, because there's many things in the people's mind, and it's good that people have asked and they got clarity, and looking forward for in fact how soon we are going to implement it and how that going to change the structure of the loan framework we're talking about under committee report. So the good, and in fact, thank you for to both of you, Mr. Mehta, Mr. Bhatia, for joining us for such a such a timely. In fact, when I talk about the webinar, is basically placed in a time where we're talking about the recovery and the banking-led recovery we are talking about, and then I know your insightful is going to play a critical role in terms of shaping up some of the framework that most of us will design for the future. Thank you for joining us, and we'll have a closing remark from Kaustubh. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for providing this opportunity.
A big thank you to all our speakers today, and a special thank you to all our attendees who have participated in the webinar today. We will be sending out an email to all our attendees with the recording of the webinar, along with a white paper which covers recommendations of the Kamath Committee on Resolution Framework of COVID-19 related stress for different sectors. If you have any other questions or queries, you can write to us at india@dnb.com. That is India, INDIA, @dnb.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.